Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today, this is a special episode because this represents our 100th episode. I was looking back this afternoon as we're recording this, and our first episode was over 2 years ago on October 28, 2020. And this represents a little over 2 years and now 100 episodes since we began this little adventure called History You Didn't Know But Should.
Yeah, I'm just so thankful because I remember, we started out basically sitting in the office just talking about random historical things that were going on in the world at the time. And that would always kind of lead us back to a moment in history. And, it got to the point where when we were just sitting around talking, it was like, that might be good for us to just plug in a microphone and just to kind of record some episodes and talk about things and how history in the past is important to today. And Ray, it's been a journey that has been just fascinating, not only of some of the episodes we've talked about, but just how far the reach is of a podcast. You and I sitting together talking through various historical topics in small Bladen County has actually made its way all the way across the world. How cool is that?
It's very unexpected, I will say that. I still remember the first episode we recorded, Chris, and I went back a few weeks ago and listened to a little bit of it. October 28, 2020, like I said a minute ago, we posted, I don't know when we recorded it, probably a week or so before, Spanish flu in North Carolina. It was an interesting episode. I think it was a good episode. I think it stands up on its own. No need for us to go back and re-record it. But there's no music, there's no intro, there's no outro. It's literally just plop, here we are. And then we adopted a piece of music that sounded like we were introducing a scary movie or something. And then we finally found the music we're using now. But it's been an interesting journey with this particular podcast, because I remember, Chris, a lot of people who know us probably think this was Ray's idea, that Ray was the one who had the idea for the podcast. This sounds like something Ray would do. But no, it was Chris's idea. I still remember you coming in my office one day and saying, we should do a podcast. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, and it basically is just taken off. And you and I, we love talking history, and there's so many things about history that's just still fascinating me. Ray, we've done 100 episodes, and we haven't even begun to discuss a lot of things that are still out there for us to talk about. And, I do remember that first one, when we were talking about the Spanish flu, and then kind of think about where we've gone, where we've talked about the Wright brothers. And then we hit on the tragedy at Waco. But then we've kind of looked at some historical places, especially here in southeastern North Carolina, where we are. We've looked at, the Elwell Ferry, the FFA camp at White Lake, and there was an interesting one that took place in Robeson County when we were talking about the Battle of Hayes Pond. And for many, they were very intrigued by that podcast because they didn't really understand the role of the KKK that was in that particular area and some of the things that were taking place. And then we've done some strange ones. Some of the ones that Ray's requested that's been kind of out there that I was like, Ray, I've never even heard of that particular story or that episode. And then when we start digging into it, it's like, oh my gosh, that is just fascinating, that story or that detail that comes out. So we've been all over the place with the various topics, but Ray, I can't think of one that's been bad as far as the topic that we've discussed, because all of them have been just very interesting and very engaging, and I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I think, when I was looking back over all the episodes, there are a lot of them that I didn't remember doing. And then when I see the title, I'm like, oh, I remember that. I mean, we did one on Ing and Chang Bunker. the Siamese twins. We've done episodes on, one of the top rated episodes we did was on North Carolina Governor John Owen. And I think we called it The Governor Who Almost Became President or something like that. And that was the reason that one got such high ratings is we got local media attention. People outside our area probably don't know this, but that was in January of 2021. And no, not January 2020. That was December of 2020. And we got interviewed by a local newspaper, and they posted the podcast, the episode. So we got a big bump out of that one. But we've done others, Zebulon Vance, the fire at Fayetteville, the fire at the Market House, and Fayetteville is no more, talking about Fayetteville, North Carolina. The legend of Theodosia Burr, the daughter of Aaron Burr, who disappeared off the coast of North Carolina. We talked about all sorts. David Walker's appeal. The president is a sick man, talking about Grover Cleveland's throat or mouth surgery. I mean, just so many episodes that, you look back on and it's like, oh, I remember doing that. And, I'm not one to go around and listen to my own podcast over and over again, but some of them I'm going to have to go back and listen to.
Well, I think the other thing that we try to do is when there are national events that are going on, or there's important things that are upcoming, we try to do podcasts that speak to the history of that particular thing. When we found out that a member of the Supreme Court was going to retire, we thought it would be a good idea to create a podcast that looked at, the importance of the Supreme Court, but also how, the Supreme Court selects that new person to be a part of. We are, kind of doing this reflection episode in the midst of the transition of power within Congress. And, we've done a lot of episodes on Congress, and Ray, when we start thinking about some of those episodes that we've done and some of the ones that we're going to do, and we talk about some of the acts of violence that took place in the Capitol, and then we are seeing some of that play out even now. So, there's a lot of things here that are very in tune to what's happening in today's society. And, and I think the biggest thing that I want to say to our listeners is thank you for giving us suggestions or giving us ideas, or just turning on the podcast and listening to it and sharing it with someone else, because we don't want to, this is not about us making any money. This is not about us winning any awards. This is just simply us taking our love of history and passing it on to other people, and hoping that they'll pass it on to others, and that, people will know that there's a place where they can go on a podcast where they can learn some unique history facts, hopefully enjoy the dialogue that you and I have with it. But at the end of the day, they leave that podcast saying, that was pretty cool. I learned something that I had never heard before.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about strange podcasts. We've done our fair share of those. We did the Beast of Bladenboro when we looked at the White House and the Capitol building. We looked at ghost stories related to those particular buildings. And you mentioned political violence. Our last episode, the episode right prior to this one, was actually on political violence in Congress. And of course, the week we are recording this, there has been a scuffle on the floor of Congress in the House of Representatives. So sometimes we know, okay, this particular episode is going to deal with an issue that is current, but then sometimes you record an episode and then it becomes current before it even airs. And that was an example of that. But we did several about ghosts, which is, of course, Chris's favorite subject.
Yeah.
To talk about ghosts and hauntings. So I think we've covered everything. We've covered, presidential elections, presidential politics. We've covered ancient history. I think we looked at Caligula. We've looked at Alexander the Great. I think we looked at a pharaoh as well. We've looked at a number of things: global history, American history, local history. We're just all over the place. And in the midst of all that, Chris, and I don't think we give enough attention to this, we've had two three guests on the show. We had Elizabeth Sanders talking about North Carolina governor. Oh, help me out here.
Jim Hunt.
Jim Hunt. We had Rodney Smith talking about I don't remember, Chris. What was it? We had Rodney Smith talking about oh gosh. Let's see, y'all. Hang on a second. I've got to look it up. But anyway, while we're looking that one up, we also had Daniel Boone. That was it. Rodney Smith talking about Daniel Boone. Hope he doesn't hear this. And then we had Remy talking about Martin Luther, the great reformer. So we've had some guests, and there's some people out there that we're still planning to bring on the podcast as guests. But on most episodes, the vast majority episodes, it's just Chris and Ray sitting down, as Chris said a minute ago, just talking about history that interests us. Because Chris, I don't think we've ever sat down and said, well, you know what, this will get a lot of listens. This will get a lot of people to listen. It's just, well, we find this interesting, so let's record an episode on it. So it's never trickery or just trying to get listens. It's always what we find interesting.
Yeah, I was so out of 100 episodes, what would you say has been the most rewarding aspect of doing this podcast?
I think a lot of it is just things that I didn't know. You know, we talk about the episodes on Fayetteville, North Carolina, where the market house, you know, the history of the market house there in Fayetteville, or the fire in Fayetteville, the episode Fayetteville is No More, where you learn local history. You know, I tend to be one of those that looks at national history, American history on a big scale. But sometimes getting an opportunity to look into local history and learn about history of Southeastern North Carolina has been something that has been very rewarding for me. What about you?
You know, I think being able to have a platform where we're able to just talk about historical things, and that people worldwide are tuning in to listening to them. I remember there was one we were talking, and it kind of goes back to your scary episodes. But when we looked at the Winchester house, Sarah Winchester, and you know what happened with me, I'd never heard about that before. I didn't know anything about it. And so not only did we do the podcast and it allowed me the opportunity to research and learn about it, but even after the podcast, you know, I had this conversation. I was talking to someone about architecture one day. I don't even remember what it was, but I was able to segue right into, hey, you should check out this podcast. Yeah. And it kind of talks about, you know, where there's, you know, hallways, you know, leading to nothing, and there's these weird doors and all of that, and then how that tied into guns and, you know, the Winchester guns, and just every podcast we've done has a story, and for me that is absolutely fascinating, is that we're taking particular things and we're weaving them into the narrative of life, and we see that there's good, bad, and ugly in all things. And I think that's what I've enjoyed the most about the podcast is being able to dig into an aspect of history that maybe I didn't know much about, and trying to tie it into something that is relevant to today's society. That's been very enjoyable.
Yeah, it's been a ride. So Chris, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. You ready?
I'm ready.
What is your favorite episode?
So, favorite episode, there's quite a few that it's hard for me to pinpoint one, and I kind of go back to the one that we did about Buried Alive, the story of Samuel Jocelyn, in which he had this accident and everybody thought that he was dead, and they put him in the casket, and you know, he was still alive. You know, they found out and I think what really got me on that one is because that was one that you recommended, and you were so passionate about that, and many people can't see us because our podcasts are audio only, but just watching you in detailing these podcasts, you get so animated, and watching how you do your hands and your body motion as you're talking about a particular aspect, you were very animated during that podcast, that still registers with me. So it's a lot of the behind the scenes, in addition to the actual recording of the podcast and the material. But Ray, if people could only see you when we are doing a podcast, all of them would be memorable, because forget about how many takes it takes to get it started, but just watching your passion in talking about, especially that one. It was the horrifying story of Samuel Jocelyn, and you just made it come to life.
The horror is just always the best. It's like our students. What do students like? They like bloodshed, war, death, disease. That's what they want to hear about. They don't want to hear about anything else. They want to hear about that kind of stuff. And I'm very much, I guess, in the same boat. And I had forgotten about that particular episode. For me, I think my favorite episode, other than the two I mentioned on Fayetteville, The President is a Sick Man on Grover Cleveland, about his surgery. I've already mentioned that. He had a surgery on a yacht while he was president to remove a tumor at the top portion of his mouth. That is a fascinating subject, and one that I think it's one of those episodes that I think it just sort of hit the mark, so to speak. I think it was a very, very good episode. But I think when I go through the episodes, I see a lot of them that I think are just really, really good. Recently, we've had like Lessons from Alexander the Great, The Beast of Bladenborough, The Legend of Stingy Jack from this Halloween. The explosion of the USS Princeton. We did an episode on the battleship North Carolina, bringing home the showboat. We've done episodes on the Statue of Liberty, the Washington Monument, the Capitol, the White House, Warren Harding's political corruption, all sorts of folks. John Calhoun. One of my favorite, and this was one that I bugged Chris about for a long time. Chris, we've got to do an episode on this. And Chris kept going, well, I don't know. And that was the Butterbox Babies. And that episode was on May 27, 2022. I had forgotten about that episode until I just saw it pop up. But I remember that was one that Chris had to be pressured into recording. But I think once he did the research and once we recorded it, it was a good one.
Yeah, I still have nightmares about it though, but it was good, and it was informative. Just talking about the horrendous treatment of those young children. And so, Ray, here we are, 100 episodes down. We've covered a lot, and I just can't wait for the next 100 episodes. I know that you and I have already talked about places we want to go, things we want to do within the next 100 episodes. But as we kind of end this reflection, I just want to take a moment and thank all the listeners. Whether you are in the Netherlands or Ireland or in Southeastern North Carolina, wherever you are, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to two simple, ordinary history guys from North Carolina who just love history and love telling a story. And hopefully it's made some sense and it's been educational, maybe informative and fun. But I want to thank our listeners. We've got listeners all across the world. I am humbled by that. I have no idea. I had no idea back in 2020, Ray, when we recorded that first episode of what it would do, but it has really made its way out there. And I am so thankful to work alongside of you. This was something we thought we'd just try 1 or 2 episodes, and here we are, 100, and I can't wait for another 100.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride. Well, we'll be back next week with the 101st episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. Until then, like us on Facebook and Twitter. Recommend this podcast to your friends and your family. And if you have any suggestions, leave them there, or you can email them to us at historyyousshouldknow@gmail.com. That's history, the letter you should know @gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
Talk to you later.